Hi guys, I've got this video sped up a little bit because it was a very long video. I am showing you here that I am going to alter this vintage dictionary. It's got some nice images in there and I'm going to use some of those for, other projects. But what I'm going to do here, I've got this metal tape that you can get from Home Depot or Lowe's. And then I've got a stylus there, so it's an embossing stylus. I'm going to be embossing with that metal tape. I've got my brush there, my paintbrush, and some black acrylic paint. So what I'm going to do is cut pieces of this metal tape, and I will be putting that on the raised area of this cover. So just cutting some pieces. I just changed my mind. Instead of doing like small pieces, I cut the pieces to length. So the only part that I'm going to be using the metal tape on is where there's the raised area on this cover. So here, just measuring it out, just eyeballing it, measuring it out, cutting that metal tape to size to just fit where that that raised area is, that raised border. So it's got a really cool raised design on it. So it looks like there's raised designs of some books and some scroll work there. And so I'm just going ahead and taping that metal tape all around the raised areas there. Okay, so now I've got all of the raised areas covered. Here I'm patching a little piece that there was a gap in between the metal tape, so that's not a problem. If you don't have a book that has some raised areas to do this technique, you can create your own raised areas. Like you can do designs on your cover with like hot glue if you wanted to. String, you could do leaves. I have a video where I did, took some leaves and stuff from my backyard and laid them on the cover and then used the metal tape over top and embossed, and that turned out really well. Now I am just embossing, using my embossing stylus to show that texture some more. So this is burnishing that metal tape down so that you can see those raised designs much better. And so if you don't have an embossing stylus, you could also use like a Q-tip or like the handle of, like the end of the handle of a paintbrush. I've used that before. I like the embossing stylus though because it's small and you can get like really good detail. So here, as you can see, I'm just going down. That one I think has a book. I think is an image of a book there, and you can see how it shows up a lot better once you start using the stylus on there. It just, pushes that metal tape down and you can see those raised areas much better. So what I ended up doing is just taking this book and going, just going to now it's done there, but I just went to the living room, sat down and watched TV and just took my time and embossed the rest of that. So now the next step to this is to take some black acrylic paint, so just any kind of acrylic paint, and a dark paint is best, so I find black is best. So I'm just wetting my brush here and just dipping it in there, and I'm putting just one layer of the black paint over top. And then what you will do is just take a paper towel, and it doesn't have to be damp, just a regular paper towel and a dry paper towel even. And while that black acrylic paint is still wet, you will take that paper towel and you will wipe off most of that black paint, and that will leave like the black paint in the crevices of the raised areas, and I will show you that here in a second. And sorry about this guy, I taped all this beforehand and there's like just a lot of steps to this, but it's really easy steps, and Here I'm showing you where I just take that, just tapping it and rubbing off the excess black paint, rubbing it off of there, and now you can see the design even better. So I'm just going over that really quickly. So here I have the completed embossing area done, so I've wiped all of the excess paint out. And so my next step, I am just going to take some pieces of scrapbook paper, just different pieces and different colors, just very colorful pieces there. I'm using the edge of the paper and putting it up against the edge of the middle of the center right there, just so I can have a sharp edge there in between, you know, the middle and then all of that embossing there. So I am going to use some Mod Podge to put that down, and I'm going to cover that whole middle area. I'm going to cover the spine, I'm going to cover the back, I'm going to cover like the edges of the entire cover with the pieces of scrapbook paper. So you want to make sure that you have plenty of Mod Podge here. So first I just put Mod Podge down on the cover itself and lay that down, and you want to put some Mod Podge over the top of the scrapbook paper as well. You want to seal it, you want to get it like as secure as possible. So I'm just lining that up and making sure that it's lined up nice and neat up against that border, that metal border there. And so that is what I'm doing with the rest of that book. So this is, you know, the second step of the process. So I'm just covering the original like cover of that book with pieces of scrapbook paper. Okay, so I've got that completed. So I have the middle section covered with the scrapbook paper, I have the edges covered, I have the back covered. And here I am showing you that I have some overhang. I wish I would have had a little bit more overhang in some sections. I want at least, you should at least have an inch overhang of scrapbook paper so that you can fold that paper over like I'm showing you right here. So I'm putting a lot of Mod Podge on because this scrapbook paper was pretty thick, so I had a hard time keeping it like in place, so I had to like really burnish it with my fingers and push it down and hold it down. So I got a lot of Mod Podge on the back of the cover there, and on the scrapbook paper itself and over the top, because you want to make sure, like I told you before, you want to make sure that you have a good seal and you know that it stays in place. So make sure that you have enough paper that will overhang where you will have enough to fold over and cover all of that edge. So at least an inch. You could go over that an inch and a half just to be safe if you want. We will be covering the inside of these with another decorative piece of paper that I'm going to work on later. So here I'm showing you the back, and that's all covered with different pieces, and I will do the same thing with the back as well. I will be folding that over. Now I've got all those edges folded over, and the next step is going to be using some gesso. So I'm going to take my white gesso and I'm going to cover the scrapbook paper with white gesso. So I'm not going to cover it completely. You're going to see like some of that color and texture through, and I found the easiest way to do so. So I've taken my knife there, my palette knife, and I found that the easiest way to spread that is just with an old credit card or an old gift card. So here I am, I'm just spreading like not a real thin layer over it, but you know, enough to where it's covered, but you can still see some of that scrapbook color through. So I'm going to do all of that, doing the edges with the palette knife there, the small areas with the palette knife, and then the front. So here it's done. So I let this gesso dry overnight, and so it's completely dry, and so now I'm going to put some silver metallic paint. So this is just acrylic paint. I'm putting it on my jelly plate, and I'm going to brayer that on there, just put a thin layer of that on there, and I will use a stamp to break up that silver a little bit, because I don't want a solid layer of silver there. And you can see me just cleaning off my brayer with on a sheet there, waste sheet. So there's my stamp. So I'm using that to just break up the paint there. And once I'm done with that, I'm going to let that layer completely dry before I put the other layer on. So there's going to be a mixture of silver and some black acrylic paint. Alright, so we got that silver layer drying, or dried completely, and now I'm putting the black paint, acrylic paint over top, so just that same paint that I used for the embossing, that metal tape there, and just go ahead and brayer that on, and I will also be breaking up that layer of paint with my stamp, with my rubber stamp. So just covering that plate completely. Clean my brayer off there, and go ahead and just use my stamp, break that up as I said, cleaning that stamp on that waste sheet as I go there. And now I'm just going to pick up my book, and I'm going to put that color on the back of the cover there over top of that gessoed cover, and we'll see what that looks like. And as you can see, it didn't transfer a lot there, so I end up just picking up the jelly plate and just using it as a stamp and just pressing down, and I can get more of that paint transferred on there. So you could probably just skip this step, because I end up on the inside, the scrapbook paper that's folded over the edges inside the cover, you know, I just use my finger, and I just put a layer of that silver paint with my finger, and then a layer of the black paint on with my finger. So you could probably maybe get away with that, but I do like using that jelly plate to stamp that color on. So there, I'm about finished. I should be there. It's getting there. I don't want to cover it completely where it's just solid color. So that is why I actually use the jelly plate, so that there's some distress there. So it gives you some sort of a distressed look. So now I'm going to wait for that to dry, and then I'll do the front side. So now I'm picking it up. I'm doing that inside as well. So I'm just again using that as a stamp, but then I do end up just using my finger inside there. So we'll wait for that to dry. I'm just trying to add some texture there, but I don't think I continue with that. I don't. Now I'm just kind of picking up some excess paint with that waste sheet there, because there's like a little too much there. Now that it's dry, I think it's pretty much dry pretty quickly, I take a sanding block and I sand off some of that paint. So I'm distressing it even more. So as you can see, it's not a solid black, it's not a solid silver. You can't really see that silver very well on the screen, but I can see it. I am sanding that layer off, some of that gesso off of there, so that you can see a little bit of that scrapbook paper color coming through. So I will work on that, and then I'll show you what it looks like. So here's the end result. I really like the look of it, and I need to do the front. I've got my Distress ink out, so I've got some Tim Holtz Distress ink, and I think that was, I want to remember what the colors were here. I just take my finger and I start rubbing in some of that color. Let me find, really quick, let me see if I can get those colors for you. There's a blue that's broken china. So the blue there is the broken china, and there is a set here. Alright, so I have the gathered twigs, and then I have a rusty hinge. So I'm just tapping on that color. So I'm just using the Distress ink kind of as a stamp and just stamping that ink right on there, using my finger and rubbing that in. So I'm giving it some more color, adding some more depth and interest to the back of that. So here I start working on the front, so it's the same process. I just put that silver down, let it dry. I've made a little template there, or a little stencil, so I've cut that out so I can just stamp that over top and not get any of that paint on what I've done with that metal tape. So I just tape like 4 pieces of paper together in the shape of that, the center part there, and I'm going to do that exact same process that I did to the back. So I'm just stamping that color on. I'm going to take that sanding block and I'm going to sand all that extra paint off there, and then take that Distress ink. I think I used 3 different colors there. I did use that rusty hinge, the gathered twig, and the broken china, and did the same thing for that center area. Then I did use my fingers for that outside edge of that cover, so you can see kind of like a white trim around the outside there of the metal tape. You can see kind of that whiteness there. I end up just taking my finger and finishing that up, and then the inside as well, where I'd folded the scrapbook paper over. Now you can see the results of that, and it's looking really cool. I'm really happy with it. So now I am taking some thin cloth. So this just came from a sample, some kind of a fabric sample, and I've just cut some squares out to the width that I want it, enough to wrap around the spine. So I'm going to glue, with the Mod Podge, I am going to glue those pieces around the spine. This is going to help keep that spine in good shape. And so I'm just taking my flat brush there and carefully, putting that Mod Podge on there. And so I'm going to wrap that around. I'm careful to leave an overhang out on the edge. You can see that at least an inch overhang. So I'm going to go and overlap those pieces of fabric there, and I'm not concerned about what pattern that looks like or anything, or what colors, because I will be painting over that. So I have the layer of Mod Podge on the spine itself, and then I will overlap the pieces of the fabric on that, and then I will also put a layer of Mod Podge over top of that fabric, just to make sure that there is plenty of seal there, like I did with the scrapbook paper. And then I will fold over that overlap to the edge of that spine there, so on the inside edge. So I got that front edge glued down first, and then I'm just flipping it up, and I'm going to do the center next. So just folding those over, and it's not completely dry, they're still wet. And again, I'm just putting a layer of that, a good amount of the Mod Podge on that spine, the front of that spine. Going to flip those pieces of fabric over, and I like that these are nice and thin pieces of fabric, because it's just going to wrap around really well. So we're folding all those over, then I'm going to flip it over again and do the back edge. So here I've got putting plenty of Mod Podge over that, making sure that that's going to stay down really well. Alright, so I've got all of that done and dry, so I've got all the edges, the front. So now I'm sitting it up, and I'm going to fold over that overhang. I did trim some of it off. You can see that I've cut the corner, so I've like cut a slit where the corners are there on that end, and I will just carefully fold that fabric over to the inside of the spine there. And I'll do that on both ends. So there I'm just fixing that in there, making sure that that's going to stay in there nice and secure. I'll put another layer of Mod Podge on the outside of that to make sure that that stays. So I have all that done, and I wait for it to dry overnight, and now I am putting a layer of gesso over the top of the fabric, just giving it some extra sturdiness, and I'm going to be painting it, so that's why I said I really didn't care what the pattern looked like or what the color of that fabric is, because I'm just painting it anyway. So here I just tried to I put this ruler up against there, hoping that that will keep the gesso from going over what I've already done there with the scrapbook paper and stuff. I'm just trying to keep it as neat as possible, and it doesn't work too well, but I just take my finger and just wipe off any excess that kind of spills over the side there. So I'll get a layer all over that fabric on the front and the sides and wait for that to dry. So the gesso is now dry, and so I'm going to color the gesso with some of that Tim Holtz Distress ink again. So I'm using the same 3 colors, and you can see where I've kind of patched. You can see some lumps there where I've patched the fabric. So I end up changing the spine, but you'll have to see part 2 of this because it turns out really cool. But for now, what I did was just rub on all 3 of those colors that I had used previously on the scrapbook paper, which was the Rusty Hinge, the Broken China, and the Gathered Twig. So I start just coloring that, and I think that it looks pretty good. I mean, I liked the contrast of the lighter spine compared to the darker cover there. But as I work, you'll see it turns out really cool in the end. So stay tuned for part 2 after this video. And here it is all done, and it looks super cool. I am so happy with it. I am not finished with it. I have a part 2. I will be embellishing this, and I actually have it done. I just need to get all of the clips together and, edited, but it looks super awesome. So please stay tuned, and if you have not subscribed, you need to subscribe. Hit that bell so you get a notification when I put that up, because it will be up pretty soon, and you will see the end result of this cover. But here's what it looks like right now, and there's the inside. Whatever I did to the outside of the cover, I did do to the inside as well. So here I am distressing the inside of that with the Distress ink. And I'm going to continue to work on this book throughout, I don't know how long, forever, till I'm done with it, I think. So I've got some cool ideas, and just stay tuned. I have some other projects that I have in mind, a lot of things that I want to try, so many techniques that I've seen that I want to try and use on this book and for other things. But in the meantime, here's the end result of that for now. And I thank you guys for watching, and I will see you next time. Bye-bye.